Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the next chapter in our 2021 Climate Action webinar series. My name is Bill Burke, AIA, co-chair of AIA California's Education Subcommittee within the Committee on the Environment, and I'll be your moderator for today's segment. So, as many of you know, AIA California has developed an in-depth series focused on understanding and implementing the AIA's framework for design excellence. This series will run through the end of this year and will feature monthly hour-long general climate action webinars, as well as 90-minute webinars that dive deeper into technical topics, today's session being one example. So additionally, AIA California has partnered with various organizations with like-minded goals to bring bonus content to you in the comfort of your own office. As always, or your own home these days, as always, all webinar content and additional resources will be available on the AIA California website shortly after the session. So I want to just do a few quick housekeeping reminders before we get started. Today's session qualifies for 1.5 AIA HSW learning units for those watching live, and AIA California staff will report those units to AIA for you. The session is also being recorded and will be posted on the AIA California website with additional resources and a PDF of the presentation shortly after the presentation. As a reminder, we want your questions. Please use the Q&A window, not the chat window, to send your questions to today's presenter. And then also understand that you can like a question, which will move it up in the queue. So a little bit now on today's webinar. So today's session is going to focus on design for discovery within the framework for design excellence. Design for discovery is all about what the designer can learn from the finished product. So every completed building contains a textbook's worth of lessons, mistakes, strokes of genius, strategies for improvement, but the wealth of information is not going to come knocking on your office door. You've got to look for it. So designers need to stay engaged with each building over the long term to extract secrets and share what you can learn with the rest of the profession and your own office so that you'll do a better job next time. So today's speaker is Ed Dean. Ed is a fellow of AIA. He's also a PhD. Ed will use 3 case studies to describe the goals and design. He'll describe the goals and design intentions for each project. He'll discuss design decisions the architects made to achieve very deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And he'll present measured post-occupancy performance data that supports the sort of claimed or proclaimed level of performance. Ed will do, in the future, we'll be doing some additional building types. So this is not the sole time we'll be looking at post-occupancy building performance. So just a brief bit of information about Ed before I hand things over. Ed is as I mentioned, fellow of AIA, PhD, combination building scientist, design coach, and an experienced large project architect. He specialized in low energy building design throughout his professional career, and he was in recognition of his contributions to the field. AIA elevated him to the College of Fellows in 2012. Over the past several years, Ed was commissioned by California Utilities to produce an ongoing series of books on zero net energy building as the building industry undergoes the necessary changes to move towards decarbonization. So with that, take it away, Ed.
Thank you, Bill. Do I share my screen right away?
You should be able to share your screen, yes.
Okay, I think I'm visible. Let me, all right. All right, so there we are. Bill pretty well summarized what this webinar is about. We're going to spend maybe about an hour or so talking about these buildings, and then any questions you have, there may be several, I would imagine, we'll answer it after the completion of the run through the examples. These case studies, as Bill said, were come out of this book, which was commissioned by, in this case, Southern California Edison. You can see from the cover that it was issued in February of last year. So it's pretty current. It's about residential buildings primarily. There are multifamily examples all the way over to renovations or remodels of single family houses in this book. So we selected three of them, which are all electric buildings. The idea, of course, being that the state is moving toward decarbonization, zero code, and by 2045, the utility grid has to be totally decarbonized according to the governor and the legislature. That's the intention. And it's less emphasis on the zero net energy because if you don't quite reach zero net energy in your projects, but you're zero carbon, for all intents and purposes, you're doing the very best thing for the planet. So the emphasis now, of course, is, as I say, is on decarbonization. And so these are all electric examples that happen to be zero net energy. This content you can see here, I'm going to give a short introduction about the structure of the case study. Everybody has a different idea of what a case study would entail, from very technical to very design oriented. And these three are the ones we're going to discuss in order. And then at the end, as I say, there'll be a question period. And so the first two examples are multifamily. Interesting contrast, because the first example, Silver Star Apartments in Los Angeles, is affordable housing. And the second one is so-called luxury condominiums. So we have very different examples of multifamily achieving the same goals. And the last example to round out is a very nice new single family house in the, which was built in Culver City a few years ago. And so let me show you, first of all, what a structure of the case studies will be like in these three examples. We're going to present the project background, which, as you imagine, will give you basic facts. Then the design strategies, which is very important. In any project, you have lots of design strategies. We're going to focus on, obviously, the zero carbon and the energy efficiency, because as it turns out, these are all zero net energy buildings. Then everybody wants to know, what about renewable energy sources? And we're going to show how it's done in these projects. It's a challenge in multifamily, especially if the site is limited. So we'll see that a little bit. We want to show actual energy performance. So in a way, we do a kind of informal verification that the projects achieve zero net energy or came close to it. And in some cases, energy modeling was done during the design phase. So it's interesting to compare modeling performance with actual measured performance and what conclusions one can draw from that. And finally, maybe the most important part, what was learned by the design team, maybe by clients who want to build another project like this? What would you do different next time? Or as Bill said, a flash of genius that we want to do it again. So that's the basic structure. I'm just going to flash through the breakdown of each one of these 5 structures. In the background, we'll cover the usual from project goals to site constraints, things that really interest architects. And the design strategies, I want to list these so that you saw what they were. The key factor in the design of any building for energy efficiency is basically these 7. And the one that is often not paid attention to very much is the second one, the air tightness of the envelope. And there's been a lot of progress on this. And I want to spend a little time talking about this in terms of the three projects. The others are sort of obvious. Domestic hot water and plug loads, the place doing those all electrically is a little bit challenging, but the technology is there and it's very efficient, and they work in all three projects, all three case studies we're going to look at. And the renewable, there's on-site solar PV. Now there's an emphasis on batteries for rate utility rate control or planning. And also now, as we know, it gives the project some resiliency if the power goes down, if there's a wildfire somewhere and so on. So battery systems are becoming more on the menu. And then there's for projects that have limited site, there's offsite renewable. In these cases, there are none of this offsite applies, but it is possible in some projects that might be a factor. And as I said, we're going to look at the modeled measured electric energy. What were the facts with these three projects? And then there's something we call, which is interesting to just look at, is cumulative net and electric energy use. Is a building net negative or net positive when it comes to zero energy? Are you zeroing out for the year? Net positive would be the goal, that you've got enough renewables to take care of that. And then finally, the big observations, and we want to know, did you achieve the goal? Are there issues now with maintenance that you want to plan for next time? Did the user get involved? And then finally, what would the design team do differently? It's very, very good to see those. So having taken care of that, let me check the clock and see how much time we have, so I'll pace myself. So the first case study is called the Silver Star Apartments, the multifamily. This project, give you some background. It's designed for military veterans who are homeless and living with disabilities, and they have to have an income less than a certain amount. Then you qualify to get an apartment in this facility. This project was done by the Committee of Friends. I think it's a Quaker organization. And they are targeting this part of the homeless population, and it is a solution to this other societal issue that's going on. So that's at the background. That's very interesting to see how that affects the design and so forth. And the project goal was, in this case, net zero energy. And they wanted to get a certification, one of the only certifications for net zero by the Living Building Challenge. And of course, they wanted to have LEED Platinum. The program was very straightforward. It's 48 one-bedroom units, a shared social space, and then there's a management office on the ground floor. Pretty simple. So the site constraints, you can see here's a Google view of it from above. You can see the solar on the roofs. It's a low-rise neighborhood southwest of downtown LA. Has very good solar access because there are no tall buildings near it, but it's very dense for a neighborhood. So the first design strategy you want to look at is the usual building envelope. It has to be very well insulated, keep the loads down, do what you can. In this case, the cost of construction is an overriding concern, and every decision is weighed against cost. You can want to insulate the envelope very well, but we're going to watch how we do it and what the construction is like. Nevertheless, the architects and engineers advocated for what's known as advanced framing. It just maximizes the wall area. It's 2x6 construction, So you don't get a bunch of 2x6s nailed together. It's they plan actually the spacing of the studs, and you can read up on this. It's a technique that is described online in all kinds of publications. But anyway, they went to trouble of using this. It's 2x6 walls, R21, truss joist for floor, very inexpensive. They do not have rigid insulation around the outside of the envelope to prevent thermal bridging. I think I made a note of that, yes. So that's a common thing to do if you can afford it, but they decided that given the extreme cost consideration, they would not put it in the design. And as you see, they still achieve zero. I hold this up all the time. They still achieve zero net energy in spite of these cost considerations that made them do less than the thing that's on the usual list. For example, also they didn't insulate the concrete floor. It was deemed not necessary in the mild climate of LA. They did, however, put in a phase change material. This is the only place where I ran across it in all the case studies. They estimated that sticking this material in the south walls with the insulation reduced the heating and cooling loads because of the thermal lag, the evening out of the effect of the sun. It did provide lower cooling and heating loads. So that was a feature. Whether they would do that again, in fact, it was a question I did not ask them at the end of this case study. The windows are very good windows, but they are basically slightly better than code. So as you can see, there's nothing super idea about any of this, and it's very, very well built. Moving on to the air tightness issue, interestingly, they just had they sealed this construction as well as they could, and put an air barrier inside the construction, and sealed all the joints and all the places where air could leak and so on. And they tested, did a Hurst test, and they didn't do a blower door test, which I will describe in the next case study. Because they didn't use that kind of test, I won't describe it here. But the Hurst test is supposed to be equivalent to, now if none of you have seen this before, this is something to know. This unit is 5 air changes per hour, the ACH, air changes per hour, at 50 pounds of pressure. So they blow air in the space. It has a certain volume, and there are 5 air changes per hour. That is okay. It's not great. It is a tight building. Some buildings which don't have an air barrier or an air tightness barrier do much worse, and some 20 air changes per hour or worse, and they get a lot of infiltration, and generally it's not very good for energy efficiency. So this number, 5 air changes per hour at 50 pounds pressure, is something that is mentioned in the California code as desirable. And they achieved it here. It's a good airtight building, but they didn't do a blower door test and didn't get lower than 5. As I say, we'll touch on this more later. Heating, cooling systems, a ducted mini split system. If any of you do multifamily housing, I'm sure you know what this is. It is a heat pump system. And they use ceiling fans. You can see one here in the photo. I will say that the individual units were not metered, and so the user was not made aware of how much energy their unit is using. Nor when they opened it, it wasn't a big issue that they discussed with the users. I think it's a little bit different now. And so the ceiling fans, the control of the ceiling fans, the level of comfort that the user feels at higher air temperatures and all a desirable thing is not necessarily, they weren't necessarily conscious of it when they first moved in. If they liked the feeling of the air, they turned it on. If they didn't, they shut it off or forgot about it. So the lighting and the plug loads, they did do a higher floor height, which you pay for it, of course, and they decided that it was worth the extra money of construction to go higher floor to floor because it got daylighting. They made tall windows. You can see one in the photo in the background, very tall windows, which daylights the unit very effectively. And that means there is a less of a likelihood that the light fixture will be turned on during the day. And so those design strategies, here you can see the south elevation with the way they did the shading for those units and the first floor units. It also gives you a good idea of what the project looks like. In terms of, this is what it looks like in the interior courtyard. In terms of the control systems, as I say, they didn't monitor the individual units. There is metering of the complex as a whole. So the only measured data will be from the complex as a whole, and the same with the PV system. It's metered only in what it supplies to the whole complex. Domestic hot water, they did employ a large solar thermal system. You'll see it in a second. And the construction, of course, they did it the way you want to do something like this, involved a contractor during the design of the project and who constantly gave cost estimates as a design decision was considered and made. The price was immediately put on so to keep good track of the cost. And they did the design build process. And not surprisingly, the contractor was so familiar with the project and was unafraid of wasn't frightened by the zero net energy features that he became the low bid, as sometimes happens. So that all turned out for the good. Here you see for the architects, here's the floor plan. You can see in the lower left, the ground floor, there's a community room and management spaces that are not part of the project. There's a lounge building with a laundry room attached. Otherwise, it's all these one-bedroom apartments stacked, and on the roof is solar arrays everywhere. Let's look a little more closely at that in a second. Here are the sections through the building. You can see the solar is almost flat on the roof from the sections. Of course, as you all know, for photovoltaics, that's perfectly okay. You don't lose very much if at all. And here we have the photographs of the renewable energy system. So we have the PV system. You can tell it's the flat part of the two of the roofs. And then the bigger panels that are tilted up are the solar thermal panels. And the solar thermal is focused on here on the left, and there's 26 panels. It's attached to heat pumps, and you see the thermal storage tanks there on the roof of the low portion of the building. So they really had to squeeze it. Let me go back one slide. In the lower right-hand corner, I'll move my arrow over there. What they found when they did analysis is that the electric provided by the PV load, sorry, the electric power supplied by the PV system was not going to meet the calculated load. So that was in the modeling. And so they looked for a place to put more panels. And you can see right here, they attached them to the parapet on the south side. And there's a few over here on the inside of the parapet. And they've maxed out where there is solar arrays. And they got modeling-wise, they got it to pencil out as zero net energy. And then as it turns out, they did it. It worked. So here we have a look at in the annual electric energy use as modeled by Energy Pro, which is, of course, not a great modeling tool. It's the code compliance software. And here we have the measured monthly. Now, they had only been in operation for 8 months, and that data for 8 months. So I had to estimate the amount that they would use and use that to get the annual total to see whether they were going to get PV, make zero net energy for the year. But you can see that the loads are pretty flat. Every month is about the same. And the measured EUI was 18.7, and the modeling showed 18.2. So they did actually make it in terms of the modeling. If the PV produced enough, they would make zero net energy. So let me show you what happened. The actual on the left, I think this works. I'm going to point to the chart here. This is the solar, this is the energy use in the solid black, and the solar produced during the same period is here on red, and you can see it's less than the amount used. So they actually, in the very first opening months, they weren't operating at net zero. Yet when you take a PV watts calculation, which is just assuming they are collecting all the energy that is really available to them, that's the dashed line. It would have penciled out to the net zero. You're producing a lot more in the early time of the year. You're underproducing during the winter months here, but the net area between the use curve and the energy curve, production curve, is larger than this, or just about equal to this. I'll talk about this other chart in just a second. And what was happening, just to cut to the chase, was that an inverter on one array of panels had failed right at the start, and they didn't know it. And it was operating without the full array. And there was another problem in that this part of LA gets a lot of air pollution, a lot of dust, and the panels were getting covered with dust. And so the ones that were operating below what they potentially could. So that was the reason for this discrepancy. I was just saying, this was definitely one of the lessons learned, that they had to, they realized, my God, we have to institute a maintenance program and be real aggressive about it. And then they'll have more like, the production will be more like this dash line, and there'll be zero net energy than this, where they were having a subpar performance of the PV system. So this is essentially what they learned in the first year, and what it was a big lesson learned. I just want to show this cumulative net energy performance, and as a curve, this is very interesting. I'll just say John Andrea of Integral Group showed me this. I think it's a very good way of representing zero net energy performance. So you take the energy produced in a month and subtract the energy used. And if you're using more than you're producing, you're going to have a negative number, and you're going to, for that month, you have a data point here. The next month, you do the same calculation, then add it to the previous month. And in this case, again, the use was greater than that produced. And so they kept getting negative numbers added up cumulatively. And when you get to the end of the year, you're supposed to be at zero, net zero. And they were, in fact, net negative because of the failed inverter and the dirty panels, dirty PV panels. If they did it, maintained the panels properly, the curve would look ideally something like this. That you produce more energy during the sunny months, and then the amount you're producing, you cumulatively add them all in, and at the end of the year, it just gets back to zero again. So this kind of curve, don't worry about it if you don't get it, but I find it very useful because the net zero is, at the end of 1 year, if the curve is right there, you made net zero. and you're either net negative or net positive, depending on how this calculation goes. Anyway, I just like this curve. I'm going to show it again later. So let's talk about post-occupancy observations. I mentioned that they didn't make Z&E in the first year. The maintenance issue is the big one, and I have to check back with them this 3 years later and see whether this maintenance is helping them get back to the intended net zero energy performance. And you can see here the photograph on the right. They wiped here on the PB, got all the dirt off, and you can see how much dust from air pollution is sitting on the panels. And so that was something that they've been attending to properly. And the other thing is they may have started to involve the users, the residents in the units, in the energy performance, and they may, as a community, and having this community involvement, the energy use may be going down. That's another thing I would have to check on 3 years later and see how it was going. So in general, it's remarkable that this project achieved near Z&E, or expected to be Z&E now. And it is very inexpensive construction. It's in an urban area. All the solar is available on the site. They have a budget for adding batteries later on. There's no batteries right now. So I consider this project a great success for the client and for the design team. Let's talk about the second one, luxury condominiums. This one is in San Francisco. It's, as you can see, it's a tall, skinny building built on a narrow lot, just from the shape of the building. There are 4 condominiums in here, a ground floor level that's unheated for parking and utility, and it's a shared space. And there's a roof deck, and all the solar is up there, a shared roof deck. The solar is built as a canopy on the building. So that's the general approach. The user was, is the owner of the condominium. There are 4 owners. They have to cooperate in terms of the usual things about condominiums, but they have a solar. They each have a piece of the solar system that's theirs, and so, but they more or less look after it, cleaning it together and so on. The client was a private developer who has been building projects like this, and he's very excited about these kinds of projects. The project goal is zero net energy. Now this client built this to passive house standards, and passive house has very strict requirements, much more so than the previous project when they hadn't built. And we'll talk about some of them in a minute. So as I said, there are 4 3-bedroom condominium apartments. They have a shared elevator. The elevator goes from the ground floor to the roof deck and stops inside of each unit. They have a parking level. They have electric vehicle charging stations down there. And let's take a look at it. So it's South of Market in San Francisco. The buildings there are kind of medium rise. There are some tall ones down there, but this one was built in an area of medium rise, 6 to 10 stories. It has good solar access, and it is a very urban site. So again, touching on the design strategies with zero carbon energy efficiency. This developer was fascinated with the idea of using manufactured wall panels. He thought the quality control in a factory is better than building on site piece by piece. And he could control a lot of the insulation, air tightness, and so on by having it built on site. He contracted to have these panels made in Oregon, and they were trucked down to the site. I'll just go back again. You can see the site here. you're putting the panels on the side of this building essentially. To do it, you have to have access from the street because you can't access it from the side. So this was an issue. He thought he'd give it a try. This developer is not afraid to try new things, I must say. So the wall construction, as you can see in this sample detail, is 2x6. It had blown fiberglass, unvented attic space with open cell spray foam and 11 inches of fire. It got an R82 roof. That's fantastic. R27 walls. And again, there was no continuous rigid insulation at the walls because it's being made in panels. And there was some consciousness of cost in this. So we thought that would be too costly with a manufactured panel approach. So didn't do it. He opted for double glazed, certified passive house windows because he wanted to get the certification from Passive House for the zero net energy performance of this building. So he bought their windows and, as I say, insulated the envelope to their requirements. Now here we go with the air tightness. The Passive House does require an extraordinary airtight construction. And they did a blower door test on each unit, each level. And the Passive House, remember the previous one, it was Hurst tested to 5 air changes per hour at 50 pounds of pressure. And this achieved 0.6. Now it took a lot of testing. It was very hard to do this, and I'll explain what happened in just a second. But just for benchmarks, just so if you're not aware of any of this, you can see 2.5 air changes per hour there at the bottom of the benchmark table. It's good. It's a ventilated system recommended. What that means is have outdoor fresh air ventilation like an HRV or heat recovery ventilator added to the system. If you get this low, you get down to 2.5. 5.0 is like Title 24 recommended minimum. The house is leaky enough, you don't have to worry about indoor air quality. 20 is the typical house that doesn't try to seal itself. So that's roughly what these numbers mean. Passive House has 0.6. That's really, really tight. And you prove it by a test, and it got to perform. So as it turned out, sorry, I touched my mouse there. As it turns out, the manufactured panels had a problem with them being enough quality control, let's put it that way. The assembly of the panels, connection to the floor, and also the fact that the floors was somewhat uneven when they poured the concrete, that it didn't seal well underneath the plates. And so the contractor, the developer had a devil of a time sealing each level because the wall panels were too perfect in their way. And the construction of the floor was still relatively uneven and uncontrolled. But they went around and sealed and found every spot that was leaking, and finally it passed the test. So that was kind of a lesson learned, but they did get the airtightness they wanted. Here's a view of the inside. The heating and cooling system is a ducted mini split again, but 2 zones because the unit is so big, and front and back are different. East is different than the west. Because the air tightness was so good, they had to use, they used an ERV, energy recovery ventilator. That difference between an HRV and an ERV, you can read about it online exactly. But basically, the relative humidity is a factor. If it is a factor, you should use the ERV, and the HRV when you don't have to worry about humidity. So I guess they thought here there's fog and moisture and so on, so they would go with the ERV. But that basically is the fresh air system. it's very much like a commercial space. Fresh air is introduced, and when it's extracted, you have a little heat exchange that goes on. It's a very nice feature if you're doing a very tight house. The kitchen fan, what they did was they ducted it through the ERV exhaust because physically you could get it close enough to where the ERV was installed. You could do this. So that prevented, having to poke through the wall to the outside. Lighting of plug loads. They were a little concerned about vampire loads. Some of them would leave a laptop plugged in if they were in the bedroom and then left the bedroom, the computer is still on, drawing power. They had occupancy sensors in the bedrooms to shut those kind of vampire loads off. Little things like that, very thoughtful. Domestic hot water, this developer uses a CO2 heat pump. If you haven't heard of it, I recommend, again, you read about it online rather than my going into it here, but it's an improved technology. It works very good at high altitude. Usually air source heat pumps are not recommended for high altitude, but these kind of heat pumps can work. Water heaters, I'm not a mechanical engineer, so I won't go any further with that and worried about embarrassing myself. But anyway, they use a CO2 heat pump in this case. And I talked about the placement of the manufactured panels. Not only was it difficult to prove the air tightness, get it to the passive house level, but the contractor found he had to get a special permit to allow the crane to work from the street and to raise the panels since he couldn't get at it from the side. He had to block part of the street. That required a city permit, took time, and time is money for developers, so it's not something, he told me he would never do it again in an urban setting. He liked it very much for when he has room to get a crane. He likes the manufactured panels very much, but otherwise don't do it in an urban setting. Here you see the floor plans of the units, long skinny units. You can see on the ground floor on the bottom, there's the common elevator up to each of the 4 units. There's parking for 4 cars. I guess everybody else has to get street parking if you have more than 1 car, or you make a deal with your neighbors to park in tandem. You can see the elevator opens in each unit. There are batteries here for backup, and the elevator requires a special kind of battery, as you might imagine, because it requires 3-phase power and so forth. So a lot of complications for this developer, but he did check all the boxes. And up here on the roof is the shared space, very nice views from up there. Here we have the sections, various kinds. Again, the tall, skinny building, and see the canopy and the roof plan, the PV canopy. It covers the whole roof. It's enough to provide power for all 4 units and the common areas, and it did achieve zero net energy. So it all worked. There you have a picture of the canopies. They are bifacial PV panels. I had never heard of that before. I went in to interview and get a tour of this building. So as a raised canopy, it can get sunlight from both sides, and the panels are designed that way. So you get most of the energy from where the sun is directly hitting it, but you get a lot of sun, a lot of light is reflected, and you can actually collect energy. I guess it's up to 30% more from the bottom side. So that was enough to put them over the top. The inverters you can see in this photograph are against the wall. Each condominium unit has its own converter and its own section of panels. So they have their own. And the battery systems are located in the ground floor. You can see here 3 Tesla batteries for every unit. That's 12 for the 4 units. And they have this special battery for the elevator, the high voltage 3-phase. So basically when these units, I haven't talked to the developers since the wildfire last year, but I would assume that everybody had perfectly good air inside if a filter was attached to the ERV, getting the fresh air. Of course, it doesn't do any good if you're bringing in ash through that system. So you have to have a filter on the outside, but I'm sure they've done it by now. Anyway, with power down, they kept functioning. So everything was in place for them to be very self-sufficient. And how did they do? Here is the model monthly energy use. Passive House provides a way of calculating energy use using an Excel spreadsheet. I thought that was very interesting. And so you could do the calculation, and the developer did it for the whole building. You can see here on the left. And I took one, they measured each one. There's a meter on every unit. Again, the developer was very conscientious and wanted to improve performance. So here, the unit A is the one on the second floor, and measured EUI is 14, and let's see, almost 8 kilowatt hours for the unit, and for the whole building, the modeling showed 23 essentially kilowatt hours per year. If you take 8 kilowatt hours of actual data, the other units performed similarly. That's why I'm not showing them, but they say they are about 8 kilowatt hours per year actual measured. If you multiply times 4, that's 32. So you can see that Passive House model modeled at 23, using 32. So they found this to be Passive House modeling was very inaccurate in the sense that it didn't measure, it didn't model exactly or close to what they actually used. But the PV produced enough power that it offset all of these loads, and they did get to net zero. And here you can see it. On the graph on the left, the energy used for unit A, which was the previous graph here, the blue graph on the right. You plot that energy used, and the solar PV for that unit's share is as in the red curve. And you can see it's almost always, except for the deep winter months, producing more than they're using. So on the right, the cumulative net energy performance, it's very net positive. You're well above net zero because you're always getting this big fat area beneath the PV curve, and it shoots up the overall curve of the cumulative net energy. And so they did very well, and these curves look very much the same for all 4 units. So what the project goals achieved? Yes, they were definitely in spades. The Passive House certification was achieved. They got the right amount of air tightness, the right C&E performance, and Passive House gave them a certified Z&E. And that's great for the developer who's able to build another project and advertise it as proven kind of buildings that he makes. By the way, he's making another project out in a flat area with no buildings around it. I think he learned his lesson about that. Anyway, the user involvement issues, I'm saying that the Passive House certification was another feature that's attracting buyers for this developer's projects. So he's sitting very well in terms of what he does, what he produces. But you know, the lesson learned here was all about the air tightness. Was too hard, took too much time. Time is money, don't want to do that. Manufactured wall panels on the site, I mentioned, was too hard to get them in place. He did it, but it required too much time with the city. and he'll use it. Well, he is using, as I say, using the wall panels when he's got room to do it. So last project, let's look at now something simpler than these multifamily projects. This is a small house, 1,600 square feet, built in Culver City, California. It's in Greater Los Angeles. You can consider it part of Los Angeles, but I guess Culver City is a separate city. It's custom designed and owner occupied. The client is the owner and is an architect. He wanted to try his hand at this. He also wanted to do passive house. So his goal was to do zero net energy performance and a passive house standard. Sorry, 2,000 square feet, not 1,600. 2,000 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. A second floor deck is what he parks his car under. Now, what's interesting about this architecturally, if you look closely within the yellow circle, there is you can see the new house is this white rectangle, and it's built in the backyard of property which is occupied by this house, which was a 1950s style ranch house on a suburban street. A lot of multifamily projects across the street and a lot of single family houses on this side of the street. But Culver City had what's known as a duplex parcel where you, because it's basically zoned multifamily, the type of zoning allowed, this is before the ADU state law that got passed recently, allowing this to happen for everybody. Culver City was already zoned, allowing this to happen. So the architect bought this house, lived in it while he was planning this house and building this house. And then he moved into this with his family and rented out the front house. So it's kind of the reverse of what people are doing with ADUs. He's living in the back unit in the backyard. And the rental piece is up here in the front. So he put a zero net energy house in the back. There is, I'll just use this Google view. There's a tree right here, which shades this a little bit in the midwinter months at midday or in the morning. You can see due south, the sun gets through just fine. But in the early morning hours in December, you get some sun on the collectors. That tree is in the neighbor's backyard. One of the things, there are several features about this house that I personally like very much. One of the things about the building envelope is that this big array of kind of a big passive solar element, but there is this product that is a German product, is an exterior Venetian blind or exterior, Venetian blind system, or EBB, where there is a sensor on the roof that controls both the space between each blade and the tilt of each blade. So it senses where the sun is. The sensor detects where the sun is located and where the sun's rays are coming from. And it automatically adjusts the blades to be as far apart as you can for emitting as much sunlight and solar gain. And the tilt, so it's always providing exactly the right amount of shade on this glass. It's a nice, smart system that he's got installed here. It's like the impressive wow feature of this house in particular. He opted for triple glazed windows, passive house certified triple glazed windows, and he had to import them. So this was a big deal. The smart blinds I just discussed, and there is a very high insulation level as required by passive house. And again, a blower duct test, because it's a passive house, it's required, and you can see the photograph here, the kind of sealing he did between the studs and the wall. He did not have manufactured wall panels. Probably, thank goodness he didn't. It's stick framed like most construction, 2x6, but he sealed every single joint, and this was new to his contractor apparently, and took a little bit more time than they planned. It was somewhat, he trained his contractor basically on this job, and he did achieve the passive house certification, half an air change per hour at 50 pounds pressure, very tight house.
Can I talk?
He chose to use an HRV because it's so tight. Again, he had to use fresh air unit, and it's so energy efficient. He uses just one mini split system. It's ductless. It's actually in the photograph. It's in this wall on the other side of the stair. So you can't see it in the photo, but it's right there. And let me say, right there, that little black rectangle is the control system for the house. It's an iPad. And so it's not wired into anything. It's just connected to Wi-Fi. And he controls all the apps for his systems just from that one place. He had another one up on the second floor for convenience, but that's all. I thought very clever. Because it's all electric, he has induction cooktops, electric ovens, and something I hadn't realized it's important. He got or maybe useful to think about, a condenser dryer. You don't need to vent a condenser dryer to the outside. So no poking a hole in the wall, and it keeps the house nice and tight. And the kitchen fan, he decided at the beginning to use a recirculating hood so the air never gets pushed outside, but it gets so cleaning the fumes and so on, it gets cleaned, and then it's introduced back into the kitchen. One of the lessons learned, I'll just get ahead of myself, is that he would not do that again. He would get a lower volume fan, not get one of these SUV type fans, hoods that blows enormous amounts of air, but get one that's very low air, but go directly to the outside and seal it really well. And because he found that he gets too much, it's not, the recirculating hood is not perfect. And he wishes that he had hooked it through the side of the house. I mentioned the iPads. The iPad in the hallway in the second floor is up here. You can't see it, just against the wall here. He uses a heat pump water heater for the domestic hot water. Here's a little picture of the space up on the roof, and the heat pump is located right here. This big thing is the HRV. I don't know whether you can get them smaller. I'm not a mechanical engineer, and I have to, if I see the owner again, I'll ask him about this. Anyway, the HRV and the heat pump are located up here in the kind of a service rooftop mechanical room. Here's the plan. It's 1,000 square feet per floor. The ground floor is like an open space. These doors can be pocketed open, so the office is back here, home office is there. The bedrooms are up here, bedrooms and baths. And this is the deck. The blinds are on this wall. And here are the sections with just 16 panels for the whole house. So it's a really tight, efficient, low load house, and he only needs 16 panels. And there they are, picture is there. 5 kilowatts is all he needs. So that you can see the deck. And the house, which is now rental, is here on the left. And he has one battery, a Tesla Powerwall battery. So he's got resilience built in. All he needs is one battery. He can shift his loads as the rate structure for the utility changes, as is happening right now. He can optimize. I think he plugs in his car. He doesn't use it that much. Anyway, if he did use it a lot, one battery wouldn't be enough and couldn't charge his car. That's another discussion, not to be had now. But this suffices for the home. And let's talk about energy performance. Again, he used the Passive House Excel spreadsheet and calculated his load to be 4,000 kilowatt hours. You can compare to the other one, which pH for the condo was about 5,000. So the PHP P is yielding the same number more or less. He uses 6,000. So again, we see the PHPP calculates a very low, models a very low number, much less than actually happens. So again, he had just been in this house 7 months, hadn't collected data for the remaining year. And we went ahead and calculated some numbers for it that were realistic. You can read about these micro details in the case study if you get yourself a copy of the case study book, which also, by the way, includes 2 other case studies which are not being discussed today. And here is the interesting curve. The amount of solar provided by those 16 panels is the red curve here. You can see, again, most of the year, except for the deep winter months, he is producing more energy than he's using in the structure. So we have a very high net positive performance in the cumulative net energy performance graph. So way above net zero and way above net positive here. And yeah, I think, did he achieve his goals? He certainly did. Net zero net energy performance. He got his Passive House certifications, very tight. No commissioning issues. No maintenance issues that I'm aware of. The triple glazed windows. I will say that what the owner told me, the architect told me, was that he bought them because he's on a flight path to LAX, and he was very concerned about having a quiet house. So the triple glazed windows what pushed him to go that far was quiet of the as the planes flew low over his house, and it did provide that. He's very glad he did. But when they came on the truck, they were so difficult to handle. It's huge. They couldn't unload the truck, and they did a special lift, and it's not necessary for the D&E performance in that climate. And so he's thinking he would live with a few noisy airplanes flying over his house and get double glazed windows, which were much easier to handle. The air sealing, as I said, he was essentially training his contractor in how to air seal. And I will second this based on my own personal experience in designing a zero net energy house. That it's better to get there are some subcontractors out there who really know how to seal, and it's good to have those kind of subcontractors. I'll give a little plug for the Pacific Energy Center in San Francisco. They very often and very regularly have the subcontractor come in, subcontractor who specializes in air tightness, come in and give a talk about it. And you can find out who they are and get them to advise you on how to, if you're going that a very tight house. And they can also provide the training for your contractor. So on one job, you get the benefit of learning what to do, and also the contractor gets a bit. If you have to learn on the fly and don't have anyone advise you, you will be doing that blower door test over and over again to get the number finally down to where you want it to be. And the last thing is, as I mentioned, the owner now says he would do a direct exhaust kitchen fan with a much lower airflow rate. Kitchen fans are over-designed, and I think people feel like I just need a lot of ventilation. They get these jet engine fans and put them in their houses. Completely unnecessary. Anyway, I'll get off that soapbox. I think that's it. A lot of good, you can read this more detail on these projects and also the two others that I mentioned. In the volume 2, the picture we showed, the first slide, you can get a free copy or look at a free copy at this place online. I'm sure once the recording of this slide presentation is made, you can get the complicated online URL. You can buy a paper copy at Amazon for very low cost because no profit whatsoever, and it's publicly available. So you can get a paper copy on Amazon, or you can get a flip book to look at on free online and read read details of these particular case studies. And with that, Bill, I'm going to turn it back over to you for the Q&A.
Okay, Ed, thanks a lot. We've got a number of questions, so I'll try and filter them a bit for you. Although you can also open the Q&A window yourself if you want to sort of see. So, so for the first project, the low-income housing for vets, one question was around the phase change material used. Do you know what the material actually is, or what the product was?
Not on the top of my head. If you go to the case study, let's say you use the URL, go to the flip book, read the case study. I'm flipping through the pages now to see if I can find it.
Yeah, I couldn't find it. It actually did say it did give 2 references, but they, as far as I could tell, they didn't actually specify the material. But they did say it enabled them to reduce the load through the wall by 30%. So that's
yeah. What I remember about that product is it's a thin layer, like bubble wrap almost, that you put in over the insulation. You kind of staple it in or stick it in, and it's just behind the sheetrock. It's like big bubble wrap, and it's kind of a salt-like material.
yeah.
I know that there was a Japanese company that was a chemical company that was looking into producing it a number of years ago. But I'm sure you could get in touch with the design team. They'd be happy to tell you exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll try and answer that more specifically after the fact. So so I think you actually answered this in the presentation. Again, on that same first project, the question is, was modeled energy use sort of aligned with measured energy use? And my understanding was that measured energy use, the output from the PV was not what was originally expected, and that had to do with the cleaning issues and the inverter issue.
Yeah, the inverter failed immediately, and so they only had, like 70% of the PV array working.
Yeah.
And
So a follow-up question. So the distributions were a bit different. Certainly, at least in terms of predicted on-site energy. It sounds like the anticipated loads actually matched up reasonably well with what was anticipated. So another person asked, kind of following up on that, was there a commissioning plan? Wouldn't a commissioning plan have identified that the inverter failed shortly after building startup?
Yes, I suspect, I don't know if any of the design team are watching this particular webinar, but I suspect they did not have a commissioning plan. I mean,
Yeah.
they would have checked the PV system right away and would have determined that one of them had failed. So yes, I assume that they did not have a commissioning plan, but I know that when they found it out, they investigated the underperformance, they put in place a maintenance plan. They replaced the faulty inverter, and they put in place a maintenance plan which was much more frequent, cleaning of the PV panels than they had been planning originally. Not once a year or twice a year, but every month or even more often. I think they've modified all of this since then and learned their lessons.
Okay, great. Let's see, there's a question here. Is it true that federal regulations supersede local government ordinances relating to PV panels? So the PV canopy could have exceeded local height limits. I'm assuming that's actually for the Sol Alpha or Solux Alpha project. So do you know, do federal regulations supersede local government ordinances relating to PV panels?
Well, I have limited knowledge of this, but I do know that the state law is that you cannot limit the height of the PV panels. I had that experience on a project I was doing where there was a height limit required, but the PV panels were higher than the parapet height.
Okay.
And it exceeded the height limit, but the state law said you cannot, local governments cannot rule that you cannot put the PV panels on. So the PV panels can be put to any height according to state law. I don't know about federal.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Let's see.
Embodied energy, I see a question there.
Go to it. Where do you see that? Oh, that's actually embodied energy. What's the break-even point for a PV panel? I think the point here is that there's embodied energy in the panel, and how long does it take for the panel to, basically pay that off?
Yeah, I would, someone who's more expert in embodied energy would have to answer that.
Yeah.
It depends on the PV panel, how much glass is in there, and so on. I did an analysis once, but I'm reluctant to quote that analysis in case,
Yeah. This is another one that I think we should be able to answer after the fact. I have read there are numerous analyses of this issue. The question has been coming up for years, and my memory is that the most recent reports I read on this were saying that the break-even point was relatively short, between 18 months and 3 years. But yeah. We'll follow up and see what we can track down on that. Okay.
Okay.
Someone asked about the smart exterior blinds shown in the last case study. Do you know sort of any information on that, or?
I do. In fact, I recommended it to somebody. Now, do I have it on the tip of my tongue? Ask another question. I'll look it up.
Okay. Okay. One question. This is kind of a broad question. One person asked if you know of, or are there examples of multi-unit zero net energy projects, residential projects in more extreme climates? There's actually asking about desert climates in Southern California.
I do not. I personally do not.
Okay, so one place I would recommend you might look is the New Buildings Institute. Is tracking zero net energy, near zero net energy projects on their website. That's the New Buildings Institute. I think it's actually just type in New Buildings Institute into a search engine, you'll find it. The fact that the utilities have not paid Ed to do any studies there doesn't necessarily mean there are none. I certainly know of single family projects, zero net energy projects in extreme climates. So look at the New Buildings Institute site, and if we can track down any ourselves, we'll get them to you and follow up. Okay. Question on the the second project. Who owns the solar? So is it so I'm reading into that a bit. Are panels allocated to each unit, or is, I assume a quarter of the array is dedicated to each unit, so we're actually sort of, tied to each unit's meter. Do you know, is that the case?
Yeah, that is the case, yes.
Okay, and then a question that a couple people have asked is, who's responsible for the cleaning of the panels? My understanding is, as with most condominium buildings, there's a homeowners association, and you pay dues to the homeowners association, and the homeowners association then basically pays for maintenance issues with solar cleaning being.
Yeah, I imagine that. I mean, I wouldn't want to climb up there on a ladder.
Yeah. But they can.
Yeah, that's an issue. They must have thought about access and how it gets cleaned. And that's a little detailed. I probably should have asked when I was doing the case study, but I did not.
Yeah. So a follow-up question onto that is, someone asked, are there cleaning systems for PV panels that you're aware of, like sprinkler systems or other sort of automation that would clean the panels?
Good.
Go ahead, Ed.
No, go ahead. You go ahead. I'm sure you have a bit of lead.
Well, I'm actually not aware of any. I mean, depending on, in California, because our rainfall is so seasonal, we do have this issue of sort of dust accumulation, dirt accumulation, wildfire smoke accumulation in areas of the country that have, a more precipitation sort of spread over the year. My understanding is, in most cases, rain is enough to sort of wash off, dust. And so I think that's why I think, there isn't a need for cleaning in a lot of other locations in the country like we do have in California because of our seasonality of precipitation. So I don't think there are a lot of there are automated systems at this point. I could be wrong, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, maybe just a guy with a hose.
Yeah, I think it's a person with a hose in most cases.
By the way, before I forget, the blinds are a German company called Warema, W-A-R-E-M-A. And there is a rep in Southern California. I don't know if there's one in Northern California. I was working on a project. I decided to recommend it to the owner, and they took me up on it. So there is one in Southern California. I could find out who that is and type it into the further responses that we have, the Q&A.
Okay. So I think I'll let you answer this. I might have something to add, but someone asked, does air tightness preclude operable windows?
No, why?
Yeah, I'll jump in and you can add on to it. I would say, air tightness basically is matters during those periods when exterior conditions are not benign. So there's absolutely no conflict between an airtight building and operable windows because, you can always open the window if you want to allow the outside air in. I think really the point is when you benefit from an airtight building is when outside conditions are not favorable. So in other words, if it's 100 degrees out, opening the window is not going to increase your comfort. It's actually going to increase your discomfort and use more energy. Same thing, when if you have, air quality of, particle counts in the hundreds, opening the window is not going to be something that you want to do. And you would prefer to have an airtight building with ventilation air that's filtered. But if it's a pleasant day out and it's 70 degrees and the air quality is good, of course, open the window. You might like, you know, the sensation of air movement across your body is pleasurable. So there's absolutely no conflict between operable windows and air tightness. Do you have anything you want to add?
I think the operable windows have good seals so that when you close them, it's sealed. Yes.
You want high quality windows that are part of the air tightness effort on the project, but it's not that you cannot have operable windows in an airtight building. Mm-hmm. Okay. So here's a question that someone asked. California policies are well established to decarbonize building, transportation, and power sectors of the economy. Can you talk about how EV charging was handled in these projects and if those loads are part of the calculation when determining net zero?
That's a good question, I think. I know the condo example, obviously I mentioned it in the single family house example where it's not used because the battery isn't large enough. Having said that, if he plugs the car in, I don't know whether it's part of the, good question. I'll go back to the owner and ask.
So Ed, my memory in the Sol-Lux Alpha project is that the EV chargers were not connected in most cases to the batteries. The assumption was you would pull power directly from the grid, and that the batteries were really for building load shifting so that, you know, if you overproduce during the day, you could draw from the batteries to run the building in the evening, or that they could be used for emergency power, backup power in the case of the grid going down. I believe when the grid goes down, the auto chargers were able to pull from the batteries if the owners so chose to do so, but that regularly they just drew from the grid. So now whether the EV charging from the grid on a day-to-day basis was part of the total zero net energy calculation, I'm thinking it was not, but I don't know for sure.
All you said is correct, I think. And I know for a fact that the cars were charged at night directly from the PG&E grid, and it was not in any way channeled through the batteries. And so it was on a separate thing entirely. Yeah. It's because the owners commuted to their work, and so they were always using the electric cars. And if you were going to charge the car, even if you had 3 batteries the way they did, they would drain the batteries in one night. So that was the rationale for just putting them on the PG&E line.
Yeah, okay.
I'm pretty sure that, like 99% sure, they were not counted in the energy use of the building.
Yeah, so in most instances when buildings are saying they are zero net energy, they're not including any transportation associated with the building, at least to date. But obviously it's something we need to think about. And it's
going to vary if people are going to work and charging the car at work and not home. Yeah. It's going to be in such a large amount. I think you would have to separate them in order to account for it properly.
Yeah, and it varies greatly depending on your transportation, you know, how much you drive or don't drive. So, okay. Let's see. So someone has asked, in the Silver Star project, were there passive strategies implemented to decrease the energy load?
Well, aside from the phase change material in the wall, I think they consider that a passive strategy.
Yeah.
Um, Other than that, they could not do much. They oriented the units as much as possible to the south, but they obviously had to squeeze a lot of units on a little parcel of land, so that was somewhat limited. I mean, when I think of passive methods, I think of solar gain. There was solar control. We had a picture of that. Designed to let the sun in the low angle sun, but to shade it from high angle. What else?
Yeah, well, so I think that's what you're really saying is there were passive strategies to limit the solar gain, and that you know, it is a coastal climate where, you know, maybe in the winter you want some solar gain, but you don't necessarily want it certainly don't want it year round.
Right.
So as you said, there's solar control through shading and phase change material added into the walls to reduce the case study says it reduced load by 30% coming through the wall. So that's a passive strategy. So, okay. Let's see. Another person asked about converting existing multi-family construction to all electric, and you know, is this sort of, where do things stand with that? Are there concerns or you know, issues?
Well, that's a general question, and I know a lot of people probably could answer the question better than I could. The answer is yes, but they all have their own problems, right?
Yeah. Ed, tell me if you agree with this. I mean, one of the challenges is certainly there are some commonalities, but you know, existing buildings vary. You know, there are sometimes if you're electrifying, you might need to you know, increase electrical service to the building. Then you run into the question of what do you do with the existing gas lines. There, you know, you might look at Redwood Energy in Arcata, you know, has done work and looked at these issues, so they're a good source.
Yeah, they have a very good website. Lots of projects.
Yeah, and so it's complicated. It's much, you know, it is certainly easier to do in new construction, but that's not to say it isn't being done and can't be done in multifamily construction. It's just, you know, each building is, there are commonalities, but then there are some specifics that you're always going to run into for each building. Sorry, we can't answer that one better, but it's not really, wasn't really the focus of today.
One thing, maybe the heat pump is always a good one to replace a gas-fired water heater with a heat pump water heater, but it has special requirements that may not be available in you know, existing multifamily. So you have to look at it, see you've got a large enough room, it's going to get cool. Can you put the piece of the equipment outside that you have to put outside and so on. So I know that one, maybe your contractor or your mechanical engineer who is experienced with this kind of thing is going to talk about the viability of certain solutions.
Okay. Ed, let's, we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. So someone has asked about if you could elaborate, tell us a little bit more about domestic water heating for the first project, the low-income veterans building.
So that one had the solar thermal, and they used heat pump and energy storage. I mean, hot water storage. So I guess they, I'm going to refer that person to the case study itself. I recommend the Flipbook website because you get it right on your computer. You don't pay a dime for it, and you can look up the details of that.
And we'll get the websites where you can download the case studies
Yeah,
to you
that's-
after,
yeah.
along with the PDF of Ed's
Right.
presentation. So Ed, to summarize what you just said, it's got a solar thermal system with a heat pump backup to cover those periods when the solar thermal system doesn't meet the full demand.
Right, and that, just read from the case study, if I may. The heat pump water heaters, which are used to raise the water temperature to that required for use, therefore consume only 20% of the electric energy normally required for all the water heating, whether that makes.
Yeah, so they're using solar thermal to, heat the water, and then if they need a boost, they're using the heat pump
Exactly.
system. Yeah.
And it's stored on the roof, and so everybody has access to hot water.
Okay, great. So I think we're pretty close to done. So it's 1:30. Let me just say one or two things. And so I do want to thank Ed, obviously, for an excellent presentation, and just remind you that AIA California staff will submit, your AIA credit, and that it should appear on your transcript within a couple of weeks. As always, check the AIA California's website at aiacalifornia.org/climate-action/. So that's the AIA California Climate Action website. You could probably type that into a search engine and it would come up too. We'll send you information on the upcoming climate action webinars, and that'll come in an email. And so I think with that, it's 1:31. So thank you again, Ed, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you at our next climate action webinar. And Amanda, if you can shut down the webinar, that would be great.